I'll write this script now. Let me define the 5 unique anchors first, then deliver the full, clean text. 5 unique anchors. Internal. Signature detail, a 1958 Oliver 88 with a cracked distributor cap repaired with electrical tape and beeswax. The tape job done by the protagonist's father in 1971 and never touched since Unusual Mechanism. Victory through right to repair law. Plus the specific diagnostic code that John Deere's own locked software couldn't clear, which a $12 part and a hand tool fixed in 19 minutes. Unexpected emotional core. An 80-year-old neighbor named Dottie Marsh, who shows up with a thermos of coffee and 47 donuts for the men. She lost her own farm to a bank in 1998 and says nothing. Just pours timeline shape. 48-hour sprint. Real time, almost hour by hour, with one deep flashback to 1971. Dominant sense sound. The dealership's glass. The silence of men who drove all night. The difference between a locked modern engine and a running old one. 7 farmers pulled into the lot of Caldwell Green John Deere on Route 11, outside Boone County, Indiana, on a Tuesday morning in March of 2023, and the sales manager, a man named Brett Kosler, watched them come in through the floor-to-ceiling glass and felt nothing but mild irritation. He shouldn't have felt mild irritation. He should have felt what a man feels when he has miscalculated badly. But Brett Kosler had been selling green iron for 19 years and had moved $3 million in new equipment the previous calendar year alone. And mild irritation was the most he could manufacture for a group of men in denim jackets and mud-crusted boots who were clearly not buyers. The man at the front was named Dale Whitmer. He farmed 340 acres east of Thorntown, Indiana, and he had been a John Deere customer for 22 years without a single missed payment. He had bought a 2019 John Deere 6150R in the spring of that year for $187,000, and 11 months later, a fault code had locked the engine's power management system. The tractor would start. It would idle. It would not work. Dale had called the service line in October. They'd sent a technician in November. The technician had spent 4 hours running diagnostics through the JDL-Link system and told Dale he needed a replacement hydraulic control module. The part was $3,200. The labor was $840. The wait for the part was 6 to 8 weeks because of supply chain issues that Dale had not caused and could not fix. Dale had said he needed his tractor. The technician had said he understood. The tractor sat in the machine shed through November, through December, through the first 2 weeks of January. Dale had called the dealership 11 times. He had driven in twice. On the second visit, Brett Kosler had told him, with the particular patience of a man who knows he has you, that the warranty claim was under review because the onboard diagnostic log showed that Dale had attempted to access a restricted subsystem. Dale had not attempted to access a restricted subsystem. He had plugged in a generic OBD reader, the kind you buy at any auto parts store for $35, because he wanted to know what was wrong with his machine. That was all. In John Deere's licensing agreement, page 34, paragraph 7, subsection C, that constituted unauthorized access to proprietary software architecture. The warranty was revoked. The $187,000 tractor was now Dale's problem. Now, I need to stop here and explain something, because without this, the rest doesn't make sense. Dale Whitmer was not a man who made noise. He was 58 years old, 5'10", 190 pounds, with the kind of face that looks like it was carved for outdoor work. Deep lines around the eyes, a jaw that didn't advertise opinion. He had grown up on that same 340 acres, had taken it over from his father in 1994, had survived the farm credit crisis of the late 80s as a teenager by watching his father do without things other families took for granted. He spoke about 4 sentences per hour on a good day. He did not call lawyers. He did not write letters. He did not, as a rule, make scenes. But there was something in Brett Kosler's office on that January afternoon that Dale hadn't expected. It wasn't the revocation of the warranty. He'd felt that coming since November. It was the smile. Not a big smile. A small, managed smile. The smile of a man who has said this exact sentence to other men in this exact office and watched them leave without recourse. The smile of a man who knew that the machine was locked and the key belonged to him, and there was nothing you could do about it. Dale left the office. He drove the 41 miles home. He went into his machine shed and stood in front of the 6155R for a long time. He looked at the fault code still blinking on the instrument panel. ERR 7741 HYD PWR. He looked at the beeswax and electrical tape on the distributor cap of the 1958 Oliver 88 that sat against the back wall of that shed. A repair his father had made in March of 1971 when Dale was 6 years old, and that nobody had ever undone because it worked. He looked at it for a while. Then he went inside and called his neighbor, a man named Roy Easterday, who farmed 280 acres 2 miles north. "You still got your 40/20?" Dale said. Roy said he did. "You know what happened to my warranty?" Dale said. It wasn't a question. Roy said he'd heard. "I'm going to do something," Dale said. "I don't know exactly what yet, but I'd like to know if you're available Tuesday morning." Roy said he was available Tuesday morning. That phone call was the first one. Over the next 9 days, Dale made 47 more. Here's what you need to understand about the men Dale called. None of them were activists. None of them had attended a protest or signed a petition or written their congressman. They were farmers in their 50s and 60s, and one of them, a man named Gerald Schumacher, was 71. They farmed corn, soybeans, some wheat, a little hay. They drove old trucks and kept their receipts in rubber-banded stacks and knew to the dollar what each acre cost them to plant. They were not ideological men. They were practical men. And what had happened to Dale Whitmer was a practical problem they recognized, because variants of it had happened to them, or to men they knew, or would happen to them the following season when their own equipment cycled into the fault code lottery that the new machines had become. Let me tell you what the new machines had become. The 2019 John Deere 6155R runs a 6.8-liter PowerTech engine producing 155 horsepower, managed by a proprietary embedded software system called JDLink that monitors 240 operational parameters simultaneously. The engine control unit communicates with 16 separate subsystems, and access to those subsystems, not modification, not alteration, just diagnostic access, requires a John Deere authorized service tool called the Service Advisor System, which is licensed exclusively to John Deere dealerships and authorized technicians. A farmer who plugs a generic diagnostic scanner into his own tractor's OBD port is, according to the licensing agreement he signed at purchase, in violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, as it applies to proprietary software embedded in agricultural equipment. John Deere had argued this position successfully enough times that it had become standard practice. You could own the machine. You could not know what was wrong with it unless John Deere told you, on John Deere's timeline, at John Deere's price. In Dale Whitmer's case, the fault code ERR 7741 HYD PWR had been triggered by a pressure sensor in the hydraulic manifold that had failed at the O-ring seal. A common failure point in that generation of machines. The sensor was a $12 component. The O-ring was 90 cents. A man who knew the machine could replace both in 19 minutes with a 19mm wrench and a set of snap ring pliers. The John Deere technician knew this. He had seen it before. But the repair required clearing the fault code from the ECU, which required the service advisor system, which he had, but which the warranty claim process had now frozen because of the unauthorized diagnostic access. The technician was not a bad man. He was a man inside a system, and the system had specific rules about what happened when a farmer tried to look at his own machine. The part they'd ordered, the $3,200 hydraulic control module, was not what was wrong. The module was functional. The technician knew the module was functional. He had ordered it anyway, because it was the only repair pathway the warranty process would authorize once the sensor code had been flagged, and replacing the module would clear the code as a secondary effect. $3,200 and a 6-week wait to do what a $12.90 trip to the farm supply store should have done. That is what Brett Kosler's smile meant. That is what Dale Whitmer understood as he stood in his machine shed looking at his father's beeswax tape on a 65-year-old tractor that he could fix with his own 2 hands because nobody had ever locked him out of it. By the last week of January, Dale had reached 43 men. Of those, 31 said they would come. By the first week of February, the number had grown to 51. They came from Boone County, from Clinton County, from Tippecanoe and Montgomery and Hamilton. The furthest was a man named Walt Pressler, who drove 3 hours from Bartholomew County and arrived at Dale's farm at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday and drank coffee on the porch until sunrise. Walt had not met Dale Whitmer before in his life. He had heard what happened through a man who knew Roy Easterday, and he had loaded his 1963 John Deere 4010, a machine that ran on points ignition and could be serviced with a standard screwdriver, onto a flatbed and driven through the dark. The logistics of what they were planning required something. 7 men could not legally park old tractors on a public roadway. They had looked into this. The right-of-way in front of the Caldwell Green dealership was private property, and trespassing was trespassing. But the parking lot of the dealership extended to within 8 feet of Route 11, and 8 feet of public shoulder was 8 feet of public shoulder. A man could park a tractor on a public shoulder. He could idle it there. He could stand next to it. He wasn't required to move unless he was blocking traffic. And the shoulder was wide enough that traffic was not blocked. They had also retained, informally, the advice of a man named Phil Denker who had practiced agricultural law in Indiana for 30 years and who had, over the course of his career, developed a particular interest in what he called the erosion of farm autonomy through licensing and equipment contracts. Phil Denker was 64 years old, had grown up on a grain farm outside Crawfordsville, and charged Dale Whitmer nothing for the 2 hours of advice he provided by phone over 3 separate calls. "You're not breaking the law if you're on a public right-of-way with an operating vehicle," Phil said. "You're farmers, with tractors, standing on a road." Dale had said that was about what he figured. "The optics," Phil said, "are their problem, not yours." That was February. By the first week of March, they had a date. I want you to picture this, because the picture is important. 7 men standing in a line in front of a glass and steel John Deere dealership, arms crossed, with rust-patented machines arrayed behind them, a 1955 Oliver 88, a 1963 4010, a pair of IH Farmel M's, a Minneapolis Moline G705, an Alice Chalmers D17, and Dale Whitmer's own 1958 Oliver 88 with its beeswax-patched distributor, all of them idling in the March cold, exhaling thin columns of smoke into a gray sky. Behind the glass, 5 men in ties were on their phones. But that's getting ahead. Let me back up 48 hours. On Sunday evening, Dale sent a single text to all 51 men. It said, "Tuesday, 7 a.m., Route 11. Bring what runs. Dress warm." He sent it at 9:17 p.m. By 11, 44 men had responded. By midnight, 49. The two who didn't respond called Roy Easterday at 6 the following morning to say they'd be there. Monday was logistics, flatbeds, fuel, phone calls to county sheriffs in 3 counties to explain, without drama, what was going to happen and what the legal basis for it was. The sheriff of Boone County, a man named Dennis Carver who had grown up on a farm and whose father had financed equipment through the same dealership, listened to the explanation without interrupting. At the end, he said, "I'm not going to interfere with farmers on a public right-of-way." He paused. "I'll have a deputy there, for your safety." He paused again. "And theirs." Monday night, at 8:15, a woman named Dottie Marsh knocked on Dale Whitmer's door. Dottie Marsh was 80 years old. She had farmed 180 acres with her husband Leonard, east of Lebanon until 1998, when a cascade of events involving a bank, a bad crop year, and an equipment loan they couldn't service had ended with the auction of everything they owned. Leonard had died in 2004. Dottie lived in a house in town now, a small one, and she kept a garden and went to church, and was, by all appearances, a settled woman. She had heard about Tuesday through her nephew, who was one of the 51. She stood at Dale's door with a box. Inside the box were 4 dozen donuts from the Sundown Bakery in Thorntown and 2 thermoses of coffee, each holding 60 ounces. She didn't explain why she'd come. She held the box out and said only, "You'll need something warm." Dale took the box. He said, "Thank you." Dottie nodded once and went back to her car. She drove herself home in the dark. Dale stood in his kitchen holding 4 dozen donuts and thought about 1998 and the years that came before it, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say, and he put the box in the refrigerator and went to bed. Tuesday morning. The first tractor arrived at 6:43. By 7:15, there were 32 of them. By 7:45, 50. By 8 o'clock, the number had reached 61 because word had spread in ways that Dale hadn't planned for. A post on a county Facebook group, a call to a farm radio show the previous afternoon, a conversation at a fuel stop between a man loading a flatbed and a stranger who said he had a 1952 Ford 8N that still ran and asked where they were going. The 8N came. So did an ancient Minneapolis Moline that a man named Clarence Huff had not started in 4 years, but had spent Sunday afternoon coaxing back to life with a carburetor cleaning and a new set of points. It started on the 3rd pull. The dealership opened at 8. The employees who arrived for their shift found 61 tractors idling on the shoulder of Route 11 and approximately 70 farmers standing in the cold. The glass front of Caldwell Green John Deere faced those 70 men. The man-made smoke of 61 old engines, diesel, gasoline, and in the case of Clarence Huff's Minneapolis Moline, a fuel mixture that Clarence described as "whatever I had," rose and drifted across the parking lot. No one was shouting. That was the first thing every account of that morning noted. No signs, no amplification, no chanting. The men stood with their arms crossed or their hands in their pockets, and they talked to each other in the low way that farmers talk, the way that sounds like nothing is happening and everything is happening at the same time. The old machines idled around them. The sound was not one sound, but many. The lumpy mechanical heartbeat of old carbureted engines, the occasional gasp of a tractor that needed a choke adjustment, the rhythmic clank of a loose fan belt that nobody bothered tightening. It was the sound of 60 years of farm equipment running together in the same cold air. It was not loud. It was enormous. Brett Kosler arrived at 8:22 in a white GMC Sierra 1500 with a dealership sticker on the back window. He sat in his truck for a moment, looking. Then he got out. He walked to the edge of the lot, where Dale Whitmer was standing with Roy Easterday and a man named Tim Hollis, who farmed corn and soybeans on 420 acres, and had brought a 1961 Farmall 560 with a front loader that still worked on every hydraulic function without a single error code. Brett Kosler looked at the tractors. He looked at the men. He looked at Dale. "What is this?" he said. "Farmers," Dale said, "with tractors." Brett looked at the Boone County Sheriff's deputy parked at the edge of the lot in a white Ford Explorer. The deputy raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Brett looked back at Dale. "You're on public property," Brett said. "Yes," Dale said. There was a silence. The engines ran. Somewhere behind them, a man was adjusting a throttle, and the engine responded. A steady, unelectronic sound, the sound of a thing that knew what it was and didn't need software to tell it. "What do you want?" Brett said. Dale reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. Brett took it. It was a single page. Phil Denker had helped draft it, but the language was Dale's. It said 3 things. First, that John Deere's warranty revocation on the basis of generic OBD access was in conflict with a 2021 Memorandum of Understanding between John Deere and the American Farm Bureau Federation, in which John Deere had committed to providing farmers access to the tools and information necessary for self-repair by January 2021, a commitment the company had not fully honored. Second, that Caldwell Green dealership had the authority to reinstate the warranty claim as a goodwill gesture under its dealer agreement terms, and that Dale Whitmer was requesting that reinstatement. Third, that the men on Route 11 intended to return on Thursday, and the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, for as long as was necessary. Brett read it. He folded it once. He put it in his jacket pocket. He went inside. Now, most people hear this part and think they know where it's going. They're wrong. Brett Kosler was not, when it came to it, the central figure. He was a dealership sales manager who moved equipment on margin and had targets to hit, and a regional John Deere rep who called every 2 weeks to review numbers. He had the authority to make goodwill service decisions under a certain dollar threshold, reinstating Dale Whitmer's warranty, authorizing the actual repair, the $12.90 sensor and the 90-cent O-ring, and clearing the fault code through the service advisor system was within his dealer authority. It was, financially, a minor decision. The cost to the dealership was absorbing the diagnostic labor, which was $400. What he did not have the authority to decide was what to do about 70 farmers on Route 11, and the reason they were there, which was not, in the end, about Dale Whitmer's warranty. The warranty was the occasion. The reason was the locked machine. The reason was that a man who spent $187,000 on a piece of equipment could not put a $35 scanner on it without voiding the contract. The reason was that the 1958 Oliver 88 with the beeswax tape on the distributor cap could be fixed by any man with a hardware store in 45 minutes, and the 2019 6155R could not be fixed by the man who owned it, using parts he could buy himself, without permission from a corporation 4 states away. Brett made 2 calls. The first was to the dealership's owner, a man named Kevin Green, who was in Florida and took 7 minutes to answer. The second was to the John Deere regional account representative, a man named Craig Albright, who answered on the first ring because he had been watching the Route 11 situation develop on social media since 7:30 that morning, and had already called his own supervisor in Moline, Illinois. The story had left Boone County by 9 a.m. A television crew from an Indianapolis station arrived at 9:45. A reporter from the Indiana Farm Bureau publication was already there, having driven from Indianapolis at 6 in the morning because someone had tipped him the previous afternoon. By 10 o'clock, the image of 70 farmers and 61 old tractors in front of a glass John Deere dealership had been shared approximately 40,000 times on Facebook, primarily by people in the Midwest and the South who had seen variants of the same story in their own counties and had never had a picture for it until now. Dottie Marsh arrived at 9:58 with another box of donuts. She hadn't planned to come back. She'd woken up at 6, made coffee, and told herself she'd said what she had to say the previous night by showing up with food. But at 9:15, she'd seen the television coverage on the local news, and she'd watched for a few minutes, and then she'd put on her coat, bought 4 more dozen donuts at the sundown, and driven back out to Route 11. She walked into the group of men, 70 of them, most of whom she didn't know, and she opened the box, and she started handing donuts out without saying anything. Roy Easterday recognized her and said good morning. She said it back. A man named Clarence Huff, who had no idea who she was, took a donut and said thank you. And she nodded and moved to the next man. She never said a word about Leonard, or the farm, or 1998. She just handed out donuts in the cold until the box was empty, and then she stood at the edge of the group with her hands in her pockets and watched. At 11:47 a.m., Brett Kosler came back outside. He walked to Dale Whitmer. The television camera was 40 feet away. Brett did not look at it. "The warranty claim is reinstated," he said. "We'll send a technician Thursday. The repair will be covered." Dale looked at him for a moment. "The actual repair," Dale said. "The sensor." Brett was quiet for 2 seconds. "The sensor," he said. Dale nodded. He turned to Roy Easterday and said one thing. "Let's go home." The engines started shutting down one by one. The sound changed. The thrum of 61 machines idling in march became the cough and rattle of each individual machine finding its silence. The Minneapolis Moline was the last to go, because Clarence Huff was talking to a man from the television station who had wandered over to ask what year it was. 1952, Clarence said. Then he shut it down. The silence on Route 11 was very large. Brett Kosler stood in the parking lot and watched 70 men load old tractors onto flatbeds or drive them slowly back toward county roads, trailing thin exhaust in the cold air. He did not say anything. He went back inside. Through the glass, you could see him walking toward the back of the showroom, toward his office, moving the way men move when they are thinking very hard about something. The John Deere technician came on Thursday. His name was Mike, and he had been with the dealership for 11 years and had worked on the 61585R enough times to know the failure pattern cold. He pulled the access panel on the hydraulic manifold, found the failed pressure sensor, O-ring blown, sensor soaked in hydraulic fluid, and replaced it along with the O-ring. The parts cost $12.90. The repair took 19 minutes. He plugged the Service Advisor tool into the port and cleared ERR 7741 HYD PWR from the ECU. The instrument panel went dark, except for the clock. The engine management system resumed normal function. Mike started the tractor. It idled for 30 seconds, the sound of a healthy engine finding its rhythm. Not the flat idle of a machine in safe mode, but the deeper, more confident idle of a machine that was running as it was meant to run, all 155 horses present and available. Mike ran it through the hydraulic functions, full pressure, no fault codes. He logged the repair, packed his tools, and handed Dale the clipboard for signature. Dale signed it. Mike drove away. Dale stood in the machine shed. The 6155R was running. Behind it, against the back wall, the 1958 Oliver 88 sat where it had always sat. The beeswax tape on the distributor cap as solid as the day his father had pressed it there in March of 1971, 52 years ago. His father had been 34 years old then, the same age Dale had been when he took over the farm. The repair had cost his father nothing but the beeswax he'd already had, and 20 minutes of time, and it had lasted half a century without anyone's permission. Dale stood between the two machines for a while. Then he shut off the 6155R, went inside, and called Roy Easterday. "It runs," he said. Roy said, "Good." "There's something else," Dale said. Denker called. Phil Denker had been busy since Tuesday. The Route 11 footage had reached the desks of 3 state legislators who sat on the Indiana Agriculture Committee, one of whom had been trying for 2 sessions to advance a state right-to-repair bill for agricultural equipment. The bill had stalled twice for lack of political pressure. Political pressure, as of Tuesday morning, was no longer the problem. Phil had also been contacted by similar groups in Ohio, Missouri, and Nebraska, all of whom had seen the Route 11 video and wanted to talk about what Dale and the others had done and whether it could be replicated. The John Deere Memorandum of Understanding with the American Farm Bureau, the one Dale's letter had cited, had been signed in January 2021. It committed John Deere to providing farmers with access to diagnostic tools and repair information. The implementation of that commitment had been, in the opinion of most people watching it, slow. The events of Tuesday, March 14, 2023, on Route 11 in Boone County, Indiana, did not settle that question. They did not change the licensing agreement. They did not strike down the DMCA provision. What they did was attach a face and a field and a specific fault code to a conversation that had previously been conducted primarily by lawyers and lobbyists and technology policy researchers who could explain the problem precisely but could not make 70 people feel it. The Indiana Right to Repair Bill for Agricultural Equipment passed committee in January of 2024. It had not yet passed the full legislature as of the time I'm telling you this. The fight is not over. It may not be over for years. But Dale Whitmer's 6155R runs. He farms it across the same 340 acres he's farmed since 1994, the same ground his father farmed before him, the same ground that produced corn at 187 bushels per acre last season, up from 164 the year before, partly because Dale had his machine when he needed it and didn't lose a planting window sitting on the shoulder of a county road waiting for a part he didn't need. Roy Easterday farms his 280 acres north of Thorntown with a 4020 that has no software in it and a JD 6120 by Britham that has plenty, and that Roy watches with the particular attention of a man who has learned something he can't unlearn. Clarence Huff's Minneapolis Moline has been started 3 more times since March, because after the television station ran their story, a man called from 40 miles away asking if he could bring his grandson out to see it run. Clarence said, "Come ahead." The grandson was 9 years old and stood next to the running machine with the particular stillness of a child who is feeling something he doesn't have words for yet. Dottie Marsh was at Dale's farm 2 weeks after Tuesday. Not for any occasion. She just came by with a pie. A sour cream raisin from a recipe that had been in her family since Leonard's mother had written it down in 1949. She and Dale sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee, and talked about the weather and the price of inputs, and didn't say anything at all about 1998, or about what it costs a person to watch the thing they built get taken apart by forces too large to argue with. They didn't need to. Some things have already been said. Some things were said in the act of showing up on a Monday night with donuts and saying nothing except that you'll need something warm. The 1958 Oliver 88 is still in the machine shed. The beeswax tape is still on the distributor cap. Dale has thought about replacing it with proper electrical tape, the modern kind that seals better in wet weather. He hasn't done it. He's thought about it, and then he's left it alone. Some repairs earn the right to stay the way they are. If that story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you know a story like this one, a machine, a man, a fight that should have been bigger than it was, drop it in the comments. I read every one. Sonnet 4.6 Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas.